Kang Jae-hyun poured himself a glass of whiskey at 11:30 at night and said the words that ended his marriage without ever raising his voice. She's already served her purpose. He didn't know Amara was standing on the other side of the study door. He didn't know she could hear everything, the ice clicking against crystal, the low murmur of his associates responding, the casual way he discussed erasing her like a line item in a quarterly report. He didn't know that the woman he planned to discard before sunrise was already calculating exactly how long it would take to bring his entire empire to its knees. She pressed one hand against her stomach. 7 months along. The baby moved. Amara didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She simply stood there in the dark hallway of the penthouse she had designed, in the city she had chosen, in the life she had built alongside a man who was now explaining to two of his most trusted lieutenants why she needed to disappear. If you've ever loved someone who turned your strength into a threat, stay with this story. Hit like, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this reaches, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. What Amara does in the next 2 hours will change everything. The rain had been falling over Seoul since early evening, the kind of steady, indifferent rain that fills the Han River and turns the city's lights into bleeding reflections on wet pavement. Amara Brooks had lived in this city for 4 years. She knew its rhythms by now. The way traffic thinned after 10, the way the building's ventilation system clicked on at 11, the way Jae-hyun's voice dropped half an octave when he was speaking to people he didn't need to impress. She had been walking back from the kitchen with a glass of water when she heard his voice through the study door. The door wasn't fully closed. It never was when he was working late, a habit she had always taken as intimacy, as a kind of unconscious invitation to his world. Tonight it was something else entirely. She stopped before she reached the door. Something in his tone caught her. Not anger, not excitement, but the flat, controlled register he used during the most serious negotiations. The register that meant the decision had already been made and this conversation was merely administrative. "The filing is already prepared," Jae-hyun said. "Choi has everything in order. We move before the end of the month." One of the men said something Amara couldn't fully make out. A question about timing. "The pregnancy makes it cleaner," Jae-hyun replied. "She'll take the settlement. She doesn't have a choice. She has no legal standing here. Her accounts are already restructured. And she doesn't know what she doesn't know. She'll think she's walking away with something." The water glass was cold against Amara's palm. She became aware of it because her hand had tightened so hard the glass was pressing into the bones of her fingers. "And the child?" the same voice asked. A pause. Not a long one, but long enough. "Handled," Jae-hyun said. "That's what the agreement is for. She signs, she leaves, she doesn't speak. The child stays managed through the legal structure. It's already written." Amara set the water glass down on the hallway table. She did it quietly. She did it carefully. She stood there in the dark and she made herself breathe. Slow, deliberate, the way she'd learned to breathe during the 3 years she had spent untangling his empire's worst financial disasters, when panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had rebuilt this man's entire criminal organization from the inside out. She had taken a syndicate hemorrhaging money through sloppy offshore structures and turned it into a machine so clean and interlocked that government investigators had twice walked away without finding a single prosecutable thread. She had done that. With her mind. With her education. With the particular gift she had for seeing the architecture of things. The way money moved, the way structures held or failed, the way one decision in the wrong place could unravel everything downstream. She had given him all of that. And tonight she stood in his hallway listening to him explain how to throw her away. She turned and walked back to their bedroom. She moved slowly, deliberately, every footstep placed like she was navigating a room full of glass. Amara had not always been careful. She had been reckless once, in the specific way brilliant young women are reckless, the way that looks like confidence from the outside and only reveals itself as desperation much later. She had arrived in Seoul 3 years before she met Jae-hyun, 28 years old and already carrying 2 promotions, 1 professional scandal, and the wreckage of a relationship she didn't talk about with anyone. She had come for a consulting contract with a mid-size investment firm in Gangnam. She had stayed because she was good at the work, and Seoul was far from everything that reminded her of the version of herself she was trying to leave behind. She met Kang Jae-hyun at a charity function overlooking the Han River on a Tuesday night in March. She hadn't wanted to go. Her colleague Da-eun had dragged her, insisting it was the kind of event where you met the people who actually controlled things. Amara had put on the only dress she owned that didn't make her feel like she was playing a role she hadn't auditioned for, and she had stood near the window with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, watching the river lights, wondering how much longer she needed to stay before she could reasonably leave. He found her at the window. Not in the way men usually approached her at these events, with that particular brand of aggressive curiosity that was really just a performance of confidence disguising something much more territorial. He stood beside her without introducing himself, looked at the river for a moment and said, "You're calculating something." She looked at him. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that probably opened a lot of doors and created just as many problems. But what caught her was his expression, completely unguarded in a way that contradicted everything else about him. "I'm calculating how many people in this room actually earned what they have versus inherited it," she said. She didn't know who he was yet. He considered this seriously. "What's your current estimate?" 12% earned. He almost smiled. "You're generous." Dayan appeared at her elbow 2 minutes later, face arranged in the particular controlled panic of someone trying not to visibly panic, and said quietly, "Amara, that's Kang Jae-hyun." Amara looked at him again. He was watching her reaction. "I know who you are now," she said. "Does it change your estimate?" "No," she said. "You're in the 12%. Different category of earning, but you did build it." He laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. "Most people don't say things like that to my face." "Most people want something from you," she said. "I just want to go home." He asked for her card before she left. She gave it to him mostly because she was curious whether he'd actually use it, and because there was something in that unguarded expression she hadn't been able to read yet, and Amara had never been able to leave a thing she couldn't read alone. He called the next morning. Their courtship, if she could call it that looking back, moved on a speed that should have alarmed her. In the moments when it did alarm her, she overrode it. That was the thing about Jae-hyun's attention. It was absolute. He didn't do anything halfway. He wasn't distracted, wasn't managing multiple priorities, wasn't performing interest while mentally composing his next meeting's agenda. When he was with her, she had all of him. And for a woman who had spent most of her adult life feeling like she existed slightly to the side of the main conversation, that focus was intoxicating. He told her she was the only person who spoke to him without trying to get something first. She told him that probably wasn't as true as he thought. "I know," he said, "but it's the closest I've found." She knew by month 3 that the businesses he'd asked her to review were not entirely legal. She told herself the technically legitimate structures she was building served as insulation from the rest. She told herself a lot of things in those months. She told herself she was protecting herself, protecting her professional distance, maintaining a clean line between what she was doing and what it was supporting. She married him 6 months after they met, in a ceremony so private, it was essentially a document exchange and dinner. Her mother in Atlanta didn't find out for 3 weeks. That should have told her something. She rationalized it as efficiency. The first year, the dream held. Standing in their bedroom now, Amara moved to the window. Seoul spread out beneath her in its nighttime complexity. Layered, bright, indifferent to what was happening 40 floors above the street. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass and tried to organize what she'd heard into something she could work with. He had frozen the accounts. He had restructured their shared assets. He had prepared the divorce filing without telling her. Had probably done all of it over weeks, carefully, the way he did everything, the way she had once admired. He thought she didn't know what she didn't know. She pressed her forehead against the glass for exactly 3 seconds. She allowed herself exactly that. Then she straightened. The baby moved again, a push against her ribs, demanding, real. She put her hand over the spot. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." The thing about spending 2 years mapping the financial architecture of a criminal empire is that the map doesn't disappear when you stop consulting it. Amara had every structure memorized, not because she'd tried to, but because that was how her mind worked, the way some people remembered faces or song lyrics or routes they'd driven once 3 years ago. She remembered the architecture of things. Every account, every shell, every legitimate company threaded through with illegitimate capital, every document she had reviewed, every gap she had closed. She also remembered the gaps she hadn't been asked to close, the ones she'd noticed and cataloged quietly, automatically, because noticing things was just what she did. Jae-hyun had pushed her out of operational access 8 months ago. He'd been gentle about it, framed it as protection, as simplification, as her preparing for the baby. She'd accepted it. She'd been tired, and in the way exhaustion makes you willing to believe the more comfortable story, she'd let herself believe him. But she had never actually been removed from the financial archives. He had changed her operational access. He hadn't changed the document archives, because the archives were a system she had built herself, on servers he didn't fully understand, with a backup structure she had never fully explained. He had forgotten that the woman he was trying to erase was the woman who had designed the room he was trying to erase her from. She moved to the small desk in the corner of their room. Her desk, the one he had always complained was too cluttered, the one she had insisted on keeping despite the penthouse's minimal aesthetic. She opened her laptop and sat in the dark. She opened a browser window. Her hands were not shaking. She wanted them to shake. She thought it might have felt more human, but they didn't. They were steady and precise on the keys, the way they always were when she was working, and she understood that this steadiness, was the thing Jae-hyun had always depended on and was now going to regret. She logged into the archive system. Everything was there. The first document she opened was the original marriage agreement, not the one she had signed, but the secondary agreement Jae-hyun had filed separately, the one she had known existed in theory and had never been shown. He had told her it was a formality, something his lawyers required. She had pushed back mildly at the time and then accepted it, because she had been 6 weeks into the pregnancy and already exhausted, and she had trusted him. She read it now. It took her 8 minutes to understand what it did. It restructured the co-ownership of 4 major corporate entities they had built together, moving them into a holding framework that was legally his alone. It did this through language so technical and layered that a non-specialist would likely read it as standard asset organization. Amara was not a non-specialist. She sat back. He hadn't just planned to leave her. He had planned this from... She worked backward through the filing dates, the timestamps on the restructured accounts, from at least 10 months ago, before she was visibly pregnant, before he had started pulling her out of meetings. She had been building his empire while he was dismantling her claim to it. The secondary document linked to 3 others. She opened all 3, worked through them in order, found the hidden account transfers, capital she had built up through 18 months of careful investment structuring, moved incrementally into accounts she had no access to, amounts small enough to avoid triggering the monitoring thresholds she herself had designed. He had used her own security structures to steal from her. Amara leaned back in her chair and pressed her fingers over her mouth. She sat that way for 2 minutes. Then she opened a new document and began making a list. Not an emotional list, not grievances, not injuries, a functional one. Assets, accounts, document references. The specific paragraphs in the secondary agreements that constituted fraud, the account transfers that constituted financial concealment, the shell structures she could trace backward to prove intentional misrepresentation. She worked until 3 in the morning. When she stopped, she had 6 pages of notes and the beginning of something that felt less like desperation and more like architecture. She closed the laptop. The room was very quiet. Down the hallway, she could hear nothing from the study. Chae-hyun's meeting had ended at some point, and she had not heard him come to bed. She lay down on her side of the bed, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. The baby pressed against her ribs again. She pressed back. She had spent 2 years building something that was supposed to protect her family. She had done it out of love, or what she had believed was love, which in the end amounted to the same thing. The same trust, the same vulnerability, the same choice to believe the more comfortable story when the uncomfortable one was always there underneath. She was done with the comfortable story. In the morning, she would need to find an attorney. Not a Korean firm connected to anyone in Jae-hyun's network. Those were compromised before she even sat down. She needed someone from outside the country, someone with international reach, someone who didn't already owe anything to the man she was about to take apart, piece by careful piece. She already had a name in mind. She had filed it away months ago, the way she filed everything away, quietly, automatically, without quite admitting to herself why she was doing it. She thought about Jae-hyun in his study tonight, voice flat and controlled, whiskey in hand, explaining to 2 loyal lieutenants how clean and manageable this was going to be. She thought about the word he'd used, handled. She closed her eyes. By morning, she was going to make sure nothing about this was clean or manageable. By morning, she was going to begin the process of making Kang Jae-hyun understand what it actually meant to underestimate the woman who knew exactly where all the bones were buried, because she was the one who had put them there. The rain kept falling on Seoul. The city kept moving. The river ran dark and fast below the bridge lights. Amara did not sleep. She was already working. She didn't sleep. Not 1 hour. By 4 in the morning, she had stopped pretending she might and had moved to the small desk again, laptop open, the city still bleeding light through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. Jae-hyun had come to bed somewhere around 2. She had heard him in the hallway, heard the careful way he opened the bedroom door and stood there for a moment. The way you stand in a doorway when you're checking on something you own. She had kept her breathing even and her eyes closed, and after a few seconds he had gone to the bathroom, brushed his teeth, and gotten into his side of the bed without saying a word. He was asleep in under 10 minutes. She had listened to his breathing slow and even out, and she had thought, he's not worried. He genuinely isn't worried. He has done all the preparation and now he is sleeping the sleep of a man who believes he has already won. That told her more than the documents had. She worked until 5:30, when the sky outside began to change color behind the Han River. That particular Seoul winter gray, flat and cold, not quite light yet. She had 6 pages of notes, a secondary document she had photographed on her phone from multiple angles, and a name, Evelyn Carter. She had come across Evelyn's name 14 months ago. She had been reviewing a legal case study, not for Jae-hyun's business, just the professional reading habit she'd never been able to drop. And Evelyn Carter had appeared as the lead attorney in a financial fraud case against a Seoul-based shipping conglomerate. The case had run 3 years, and Evelyn had gone after a man who most of the Korean legal establishment considered untouchable. She had won. Not cleanly. The case had been brutal, publicly messy, and had reportedly cost Evelyn a corporate partnership in 2 years of her life. But she had won. Amara had filed the name away. She hadn't consciously asked herself why. Now she knew why. She sent the email at 5:47 in the morning from an address Jae-hyun didn't know about, one she had created 2 years ago during a period when she was still telling herself she was just being professionally cautious. The email was brief and specific. It contained 3 attached documents: photographs of the secondary marriage agreement, one of the fraudulent account transfer records, and a structural overview she had written herself that night, summarizing the shell company framework and how it connected to the hidden assets. She did not editorialize. She laid it out the way she would lay out any financial analysis: clean, sourced, referenced. She ended the email with a single sentence: I need to move before the end of the month, and I need someone who doesn't have any reason to look the other way. She hit send. She closed the laptop. She sat in the gray morning light with her hands in her lap and let herself feel what she hadn't let herself feel all night. It moved through her in a wave. Not quite grief, not quite fear, something more complicated than either. 3 years. 3 years of choosing this man, this city, this life. 3 years of telling herself the complicated parts were manageable, that she knew what she was doing, that love didn't have to mean blind. The baby moved. She pressed her hand against her stomach and held it there. I'm going to figure this out, she said, to herself as much as anyone. I'm going to figure this out. She got up, went to the bathroom, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been awake all night doing something that couldn't be undone. Good, she thought. That's exactly what I am. Jae-hyun was already dressed when she came to the kitchen at 7. He was standing at the counter with coffee, phone in hand, scrolling through something with the flat-focused attention he brought to everything first thing in the morning. He looked up when she came in. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. She went to the refrigerator, kept her back to him. Baby was moving all night. You should rest more. He said it without looking up from his phone. You push yourself too hard. She took out the orange juice and poured a glass and did not say anything. I have a meeting this morning, he said. I won't be back until late. Okay. Don't wait up. She turned around and looked at him. Then, really looked at him, the way she hadn't let herself look at him in months because it was easier not to look too closely at a thing you're not ready to name. He was handsome in the particular way powerful Korean men often were, composed, contained, giving nothing away unless he chose to. She had once found that control intensely attractive. She had once mistaken containment for depth. Are you all right? He asked. He was looking at her now, the phone lowered. I'm fine, she said. He studied her for a half-second longer than casual. Then he nodded and looked back at his phone. She drank her orange juice and thought, he's going to keep performing normal until the filing is ready. He's good at this. He has been performing normal for months. She was going to have to be better. Evelyn Carter called at 9:17. Amara was in the second bedroom she used as an office, Door closed, when her phone rang with an unknown international number, a British relay, she registered, which matched what she knew about Evelyn's operation. She answered on the second ring. "You're Amara Brooks." The voice was low, clipped, English accented with something harder underneath it. Not a question. "Yes. I read what you sent, twice." A pause. "The secondary agreement alone is enough for a fraud claim. The account transfers support concealment. What I need to know is how much of the broader financial structure you actually have documented access to, as opposed to knowledge of." Amara had prepared for this question. "I built the archive system. My access to the documents was separated from my operational access to the accounts." He changed the second, but not the first. "I can access documents going back approximately 3 years." Silence on the line. The kind of silence that meant someone was thinking. "How many entities?" Evelyn asked. 43 registered companies, 17 with dual structure concealment, legitimate revenue on top, capital movement underneath. I have documentation on 31 of the 43. The remaining 12 I have structural knowledge of but limited paper trail." Another pause. "You built this yourself?" "Over 20 months? Yes." "And you understood what you were building?" It wasn't a judgment, it was a factual question, but it landed with weight. "I understood portions of it," Amara said. "I understood more as time went on. I made choices I can't excuse. I'm not trying to." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm going to be honest with you. This kind of case, a man with this profile, in this city, with these resources, this is going to be a war. He will come after you in every legal and non-legal way available. If there is anything you haven't told me, anything at all, I need to know before we file. Because once we file, there is no quiet conversation, no reasonable settlement, no version of this where it stays contained. Are you prepared for that?" Amara looked out the window. Seoul was bright and cold in the morning light, traffic moving on the elevated expressway in the middle distance. "He planned this while I was carrying his child," she said. "He used my own security architecture to steal from me. And last night he told his people I'd been handled." A beat. "All right," Evelyn said. "Then listen carefully, because we're going to do this correctly." They spoke for 90 minutes. When the call ended, Amara had a list of 7 additional documents she needed to locate and secure before Evelyn's team could begin the formal filing. She also had a clear instruction: do not change your behavior around Jae-hyun. Don't access accounts, don't move money, don't say anything that might signal preparation. The period between now and filing was the most vulnerable window. If he realized she was building a case before the filing was in place, he could accelerate his own timeline, get the divorce paperwork submitted first, and the asset restructuring would appear to predate any fraudulent intent. She had to appear not to know. She had spent the previous night being afraid of that role. Now she understood it was the only role that gave her any advantage, and she had always been better at strategy than at fear. The first crack appeared that afternoon. Jae-hyun's personal assistant, a quiet woman named Park So-yeon, who had worked for him for 6 years and had always been carefully neutral with Amara, called the penthouse landline at 2 in the afternoon. Amara answered. "Mrs. Kang." So-yeon's voice was different, thinner. I'm sorry to call this line. I didn't know if this was appropriate." Amara kept her voice neutral. "Is something wrong?" "I received an instruction this morning." A pause. Controlled breath. "I was asked to remove your standing appointment access from Mr. Kong's calendar system, effective immediately." Amara said nothing for a moment. "I thought you should know," So-yeon said. That's all. I thought you should know." "Thank you, So-yeon." The line went quiet. Then So-yeon said very quickly, "He also asked me to stop copying you on the board communications, as of last week. I'm sorry. I was told it was your preference." Amara closed her eyes. "It wasn't my preference." "No," So-yeon said. "I didn't think so." She hung up. Amara sat with the landline receiver in her hand for a few seconds. So-yeon had taken a real risk making that call. A woman like that, 6 years with a man like Jae-hyun, navigating that world, surviving it, didn't make moves like that lightly. Amara filed it away. So-yeon knew something was wrong. So-yeon had chosen, in a small way, to say so. People were beginning to choose sides. Most of them didn't realize they were doing it yet. Jae-hyun came home at 8:15. He came in the way he always did, jacket off at the door, phone in hand, The brief scan of the room that was habit for a man who'd spent years assessing spaces for exits and threats. He found Amara in the living room with a book she hadn't been reading. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine." He went to the bar cart and poured 2 fingers of whiskey. "Yours?" "Quiet." He sat in the chair across from her, drank, looked at her with the same expression she'd been cataloging for months without being able to name it: assessment. She was a variable he was tracking. That was all she had been for a long time. "You should eat more," he said. "You look pale." "I'm fine." "I've been thinking," he said. He turned the glass in his hand. "After the baby comes, I think it might be worth considering whether Seoul is the right place, long term, for the family." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You still have connections in the States, Atlanta, New York. It might be better for the child. More stability. Familiar environment for you." There it was, dressed as consideration, wrapped in the language of her well-being and the child's future. He was beginning to move her toward the exit he had already built. "I'm not interested in leaving Seoul," she said. He looked at her. "It was just a thought." "I know." She held his gaze. "But my answer is no." Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something more careful than anger. She held very still and kept her expression neutral and watched him recalibrate behind his eyes. "Of course," he said. "We don't have to decide anything now." He finished his whiskey and went to his study. She went back to her book. Her hands were not shaking. She was very proud of her hands. 3 days later, Amara found the second set of documents. She had been working through the archive at night, methodically, reconstructing the paper trail on 2 of the entities Evelyn's team needed documentation for. She was 3 hours into the session when she found a subfolder she didn't recognize. She had built the archive system, and she knew its structure the way she knew her own handwriting, and this folder had been added by someone else, after the fact, using access credentials that should not have existed. She opened it. The first document was an internal communication between Jae-hyun's legal team and a property management company. She read it twice and felt the blood move away from her face. The property management company was a structure she had designed. She had built it as a clean, legitimate holding entity for residential properties. According to this document, it had been used for the past 14 months to funnel capital from 3 of the syndicate's most exposed operations, moving money through property transactions that appeared on paper as routine real estate business. She had built the vessel. He had filled it with things she hadn't agreed to and hadn't known about. If that structure was audited, her name was on the founding documentation. Her name was on the initial legal filings. She had been made to look complicit in operations she hadn't designed and hadn't consented to. She sat back, breathed. He hadn't just stolen her assets. He had used her professional identity as legal cover for criminal transactions. If his empire came down, when his empire came down, her name was positioned to take damage alongside his. That had not been an accident. She forwarded the folder to Evelyn's secure server at 1 in the morning. She wrote 2 lines. "Found a new problem. Call me when you have this." Evelyn called at 6:30 the following morning. "I've looked at what you sent," she said. There was something in her voice Amara hadn't heard before. Not alarm exactly, but a sharpening. "He's been setting you up as a fall position." "I know." "This changes our timeline. We need to move faster than we discussed." "How much faster?" "I can have the filing ready in 72 hours if you can get me the remaining documents today." Amara looked at the clock. Jae-hyun had a full-day meeting off-site. He wouldn't be back until evening. "Give me 4 hours," she said. She worked through the morning with the focused speed she'd used during the worst financial crises of Jae-hyun's empire. The kind of speed that lives below panic, that is actually the opposite of panic, where everything narrows to the immediate task and the body stops registering anything that isn't directly relevant to solving the problem in front of it. She pulled documents, photographed them, transferred them to Evelyn's server through the encrypted channel Evelyn's team had set up. She worked without eating, without stopping, occasionally pressing one hand flat against her stomach when the baby shifted, a brief acknowledgement, and then back to the screen. She had been at it for 3 hours when her phone rang, not her regular phone, the secondary one she'd bought 2 weeks ago with cash, the one only Evelyn's team had the number for. She answered. "Mrs. Kang." A man's voice, Korean accent, careful English. "My name is Min Woo-sung. I worked for your husband for 4 years. I need to speak with you about what he's planning, all of it, not just the divorce." She went very still. "How did you get this number?" she said. I have access to things your husband doesn't know I have access to, Wu Sung said. That's why I'm calling you and not him. I can meet you today. It needs to be today. Why? A pause. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Because he's already scheduled the filing for Friday, and the divorce is not the part you should be most afraid of. She met him at a coffee shop in Mapo, 40 minutes from the penthouse. She took a taxi and watched out the back window the entire way. She arrived 8 minutes early and sat where she could see the door. Wu Sung came in exactly on time. He was mid-40s, unremarkable looking, with the kind of face that had learned to be unremarkable on purpose. He sat down across from her and did not waste time on courtesy. He's planning to move the primary asset transfer the night before the filing, he said. That's not in the documents you have. The account that holds the restructured joint assets. He's going to strip it the night before and route it through 3 intermediary accounts in 48 hours. By the time the filing hits, it'll look like those assets never existed in the marital estate. Amara calculated. That's an 8-figure transfer. Yes. Can you document it? He put a folded envelope on the table between them. Transfer schedules. Account numbers. The intermediary chain. 2 of the accounts were opened 6 weeks ago. He thinks I don't know about them. A pause. He made a mistake with me 3 months ago. He doesn't know I know that yet. She didn't pick up the envelope immediately. Why are you giving me this? He looked at her directly. Because I have a daughter, and because I know what he does to people when he decides they've become inconvenient. He paused. I've watched him do it. I helped him do it. I'm not a good man. I know what I am. But there's a line I watched him cross 3 months ago, and I'm not going to... He stopped himself, started again. He has plans beyond the divorce, Mrs. Kang. What's in that envelope gives you enough to stop the asset transfer. But I need you to understand, he will know someone talked. And when he figures out it was me, I don't have a lot of time. She looked at him. I wasn't performing. She had watched Jae-hyun perform concern, perform loyalty, perform confidence for 3 years, and she knew by now what performance looked like. This wasn't it. This was a man who had done things he couldn't undo telling the truth because it was the only thing left that didn't cost him something worse than the truth. She picked up the envelope. I'm going to need you to be willing to make a formal statement, she said. He was already shaking his head. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Right now, this is all you get. All right. He stood up. He looked at her one more time, something that might have been apology in it, or might have been something more complicated than apology. Be careful, he said, not just with the legal pieces, with yourself. He doesn't... When he decides something is finished, he finishes it completely. Do you understand what I'm saying? She understood exactly what he was saying. I understand, she said. He left. She sat with the envelope in her hands. Outside the coffee shop window, Seoul moved past in its ordinary afternoon way. People, traffic, the particular noise of a city that didn't know or care what was being decided inside it. She felt something shift inside her chest, some last weight of disbelief giving way to something simpler and colder and entirely clear. She had walked into this coffee shop still holding, somewhere beneath everything, the possibility that she had misread something, that the documents were somehow not what they appeared, that there was a version of this she hadn't understood yet. There wasn't. She opened the envelope and looked at the transfer schedules and the account numbers and the intermediary chain, and she saw with complete clarity what Jae-hyun had built and what he intended to do with it, and she understood that Min Woo-sung was right. This was not just about money, and it was not just about the divorce. She called Evelyn from the taxi back. I have the asset transfer schedule, she said. All of it. I'm sending it now. How did you get this? Evelyn said. Someone on the inside. He's afraid. Is he reliable? Amara thought about Woo-sung's face, the particular quality of a man telling the truth because he's more afraid of himself than of anything outside him. Yes, she said. Then we file tomorrow morning, Evelyn said. Not Friday. Tomorrow. We file before he can move the assets, before he knows we have the transfer schedule, and we freeze everything simultaneously. I'm going to need you to be unreachable tonight. Stay somewhere he won't expect. Don't tell anyone where you are. When this hits his desk tomorrow, his first move is going to be toward you. Amara looked out the taxi window. The Han River appeared briefly between buildings, gray and fast in the winter light. I'll be ready, she said. She hung up. She thought about Woo-sung saying, he finishes it completely. She thought about the baby pressing against her ribs. She thought about the version of herself who had stood at a party overlooking the same river 3 years ago, calculating what percentage of the room had earned what they had, and the man who had found her at the window and made her feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone was actually paying attention. She had been paying attention too. She had just been looking at the wrong things. The taxi crossed the bridge. Below, the river was running fast and cold, indifferent to everything on its banks. Amara watched it until it disappeared from the window, then turned back to her phone and began sending Woo-sung's documents to Evelyn's server one by one, methodical and precise, because methodical and precise was the only version of herself that was going to survive the next 24 hours. Tomorrow morning, Kang Jae-hyun would wake up, and the world he had built would begin to come apart, and he would not see it coming, and that was the only thing she had left that felt anything like justice. She hit send on the last file. The taxi pulled up to the hotel she had booked under a name he didn't know. She got out, paid in cash, and walked through the lobby without looking back. The hotel room was small and overheated and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid, and Amara had chosen it specifically because it was the kind of place Kang Jae-hyun would never think to look for her. He stayed in rooms with thread counts and city views and bathroom mirrors that cost more than most people's monthly rent. This room had a window that faced a parking structure and a heating unit that clicked on every 4 minutes with a sound like something being dropped. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep. She had told herself she would sleep. She had even lain down, shoes off, coat folded over the chair, and stared at the water-stained ceiling tile above her and tried to make her mind go quiet. It wouldn't. Her mind was running the same loop it always ran when she was in the middle of something that hadn't resolved yet. Forward, back, forward, checking the structure for weaknesses, testing the load-bearing points, looking for the things she'd missed. At 2 in the morning, she gave up and sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. Her phone had been silent since the call with Evelyn. That was expected. Evelyn had told her to keep communications minimal tonight, to respond to nothing from Jae-hyun's direction, to exist as ordinarily as possible in the digital record. A woman who had gone quiet for one evening, nothing unusual, nothing that read as preparation. She had one text from Jae-hyun, sent at 9:47, coming home late, don't wait up. She had read it and put the phone face down on the nightstand and hadn't looked at it again. At some point after 3, she fell into something that wasn't quite sleep, more like the body's refusal to continue without a minimum concession. She dreamed about the river. Not the Han, but something wider and darker, and she was standing at the edge of it trying to calculate the depth, and the numbers kept changing. She woke at 5:40 with the alarm she'd set and lay still for exactly 30 seconds, orienting herself. Hotel room. Mapo district. Thursday morning, filing day. She got up. Evelyn called at 7:10. It's in, she said, filed at 7:02. Divorce petition, fraud claim, financial concealment, and a formal request for asset freeze across all jointly held entities. The freeze application goes to the court in 40 minutes. Amara was standing at the window watching the parking structure. How long before he knows? His attorneys will receive notification within the hour. The freeze application is the part that will move fastest, that hits his accounts before he can execute the transfer schedule Woo-sung gave you. And if the transfer already happened? It hasn't. I had a financial investigator monitoring the intermediary accounts overnight. Nothing moved. A pause. He was waiting for Friday. He was so certain about Friday that he didn't account for Thursday. Amara exhaled, slow and controlled. Okay. Go back to the penthouse, Evelyn said. Act as if nothing has happened. You are a woman coming home after a night away. You were staying with a friend. You weren't feeling well. Whatever story feels natural. Don't tell him anything. Let him receive the notification and react. We want his first response documented, not managed. He's going to know it was me. Of course he is. But what he does with that knowledge in the first hour is what matters. If he calls you, answer. Keep it brief. Don't engage with anything he says about the legal situation. Just be the person he thinks you are for as long as you can hold it. After she hung up, she stood very still for a moment. She thought about what Evelyn had just asked her to do. Walk back into that apartment and look at Jae-hyun knowing that by now, or within the next hour, his world had started to fracture. Look at him and give him nothing. She had done harder things. She just couldn't remember when. She picked up her coat and her bag and checked out of the hotel at 7:25. The penthouse was quiet when she let herself in at 8:15. Jae-hyun's shoes were at the door. He was home. She hadn't expected that. She had constructed a version of this morning where he was already gone, already in a meeting, already 3 moves ahead in a game. He didn't know she'd changed the rules of overnight. She set her bag down and went to the kitchen. He was at the counter with his phone. Not coffee, just the phone, both hands around it. And when she came through the doorway, he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before in 3 years. It was there for only half a second. Then it was gone, smoothed back into the controlled surface he maintained better than anyone she had ever known. But she had seen it. Something had already reached him. "Where were you?" he said. "I wasn't feeling well last night." She went to the refrigerator. "I stayed with Da-eun. I texted you." "You didn't text me." She turned around and looked at him with mild confusion. She did not have to work very hard to produce, because her heart was going so fast she could feel it in her throat. "I thought I did. I'm sorry. I was exhausted. I may have forgotten." She paused. "Is everything all right?" He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands on the counter were flat and still in the particular way of someone who has learned to express nothing through his body. But the stillness itself was its own signal. "I need to make some calls," he said. "I'll be in my study." He left. She stood at the open refrigerator and waited for her breathing to normalize and counted to 20 before she reached for anything. The study door stayed closed for 2 hours. She could hear, distantly, the register of his voice, but not the words. The same controlled tone she'd heard through the door 3 nights ago, but stripped of its assurance now, carrying something underneath it that was closer to force. He was issuing instructions. He was attempting to manage something that had gotten away from him overnight. She sat in the living room with a cup of tea she didn't drink and the book she still hadn't read, and she waited. At 10:40, his study door opened. He came into the living room and stood in the center of it, between her and the window, and looked at her with no expression at all. That blankness was worse than anger. Anger she had expected. Anger she had prepared for. This was something more deliberate. "You filed," he said. She set the book down. "Yes." "When did you plan this?" Not a question, a reconstruction. He was already doing the math, running backward from the filing to find the moment it had started. She watched him doing it behind his eyes. "It stopped being a plan when I heard you through the study door 3 nights ago," she said. "Before that, it was just instinct." Something moved across his face. "You were listening." The door wasn't closed. "I didn't know you were in the hallway." "I know you didn't." She held his gaze. "That's the thing about spending 3 years making yourself easy to overlook. Eventually, people stop checking." The silence between them had a physical weight. She had imagined this moment dozens of times in the last 3 days. Imagined what she would feel, what he would say, the shape of the confrontation. She had not imagined this particular stillness. She had not imagined that the man who had spent weeks constructing her removal would stand in his own living room and look at her like he was genuinely trying to understand something. "The freeze," he said. "You know what that does?" "Yes." "Partners are already calling. 3 board members pulled out of tomorrow's meeting. The investors are—" He stopped himself, controlled it, started again. "You have destroyed something it took 12 years to build." "You were already destroying it," she said. "You were destroying me specifically. I just made sure it was mutual." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and went back to his study and closed the door, and this time she heard the lock engage. The call from Evelyn came at noon. "The freeze is in place," Evelyn said. "All 43 entities. The court moved faster than I expected. The financial evidence you provided made the concealment case strong enough that the judge didn't hesitate." A pause. "His attorneys have already contacted us about settlement discussions." "Already?" "The asset freeze is the pressure point. He needs it lifted to keep the businesses functioning. He's going to offer you something significant to make this go away quietly." "I'm not interested in quiet," Amar said. "I know, but I need you to be prepared for the conversation anyway, because his next move after the settlement offer is rejected is going to be harder. These men don't negotiate twice." After the call, Amara sat at the small desk in the second bedroom and looked at the city outside for a long time. She thought about Wu Sung's face in the coffee shop, the way he had said, "He finishes it completely." She thought about it, and then she made herself stop thinking about it, because thinking about it wasn't useful. The settlement offer came the following morning in a document 11 pages long that she read from start to finish without stopping. It was, objectively, an extraordinary amount of money. A penthouse in Gangnam, monthly payments indexed to inflation, healthcare, education funds for the child, a structured security arrangement. All of it contingent on a confidentiality agreement she would sign before any payment cleared. All of it contingent on her withdrawal of the fraud and concealment claims. All of it contingent on her silence. She photographed every page and sent it to Evelyn with a single line. No. Oh. 3 days passed. The freeze held. Chae-hyun moved through the penthouse like a man in a building he no longer recognized. Not aggressive, not threatening, just profoundly controlled in the way of someone managing an internal calculation she wasn't permitted to see. They ate at the same table once, said 12 words to each other, and did not attempt it again. She slept lightly. She kept her secondary phone in her coat pocket at all times. On the 4th day, Min Woo-sung stopped answering his phone. She noticed it because she had tried to call him twice with questions about the intermediary account structure. Procedural questions, things Evelyn's team needed clarified. He didn't answer. She texted. No response. She called the number again that evening, and it rang through to a recording that said the number was not in service. She told herself there were multiple explanations. People changed phones. People went underground when things got complicated. She told herself this, and she believed approximately 40% of it. On the 5th day, Evelyn called. "I need you to sit down," Evelyn said. Amara was already sitting. She was at the desk in the second bedroom where she did most of her work now, the one room in the penthouse that felt least like it belonged to Jae-hyun. "Tell me." "Min Woo-sung was found this morning." A pause. Not a long one, but waited. "He was found in his car, in a parking structure in Yeongdeung-po. The police are calling it cardiac arrest. He was 46 years old, and by all accounts in good health." Another pause. "There's going to be an investigation, but these things take time, and the initial report—" "Evelyn," Amara's voice came out flat. "Say it plainly." "He's dead, Amara, and I don't think it was his heart." She sat very still. The desk was cold under her hands. She pressed them flat against it. Woo-sung had said, "When he figures out it was me, I don't have a lot of time." She had thought he was being dramatic. She had told herself, that this was legal terrain now, that the filing had changed the rules, that Jae-hyun would not be reckless enough to move against someone physically when investigators were already watching his financial structure. She had been wrong. "Amara," Evelyn said, "are you hearing me?" "I'm hearing you." Her voice sounded strange to her, very controlled, very far away from whatever she was actually feeling. "What does this mean for the case?" "It means we have lost our most credible inside witness. Woo-sung was willing to give us the transfer schedules, but he hadn't agreed to a formal statement, which means we have documents but no corroborating testimony from inside the organization. The documents are still strong, but without the testimony, they're harder to—" "What about the documents themselves, the ones from the archive?" "Those stand. The fraud claim, the concealment, those hold without Woo-sung. But the broader criminal investigation, the syndicate-level evidence, that's going to be significantly harder to prosecute without someone inside." Amara set the phone on the desk without ending the call. She pressed both hands flat on the wood and looked at the wall in front of her and made herself breathe. A man was dead. He had walked into a coffee shop and told her the truth and handed her an envelope and told her to be careful. And now he was dead in a parking structure, and the official story was his heart. And Jae-hyun was 30 feet down the hallway. She picked the phone back up. "I'm going to need to not be in this apartment," she said. "I agree. I've been thinking about that. I have a colleague in Seoul, someone completely outside of any network connected to your husband. She has a property. I'll figure out the location," Amara said. "I need you to do something else. The financial investigation, is there any way to accelerate it? Any way to move it from civil to criminal territory faster than the current timeline? If we had a formal investigator request, what would trigger that?" Evelyn paused. "Evidence of a crime that extends beyond the civil fraud claims. Something that compels a criminal referral. The kind of evidence that makes a prosecutor's office move whether they want to or not." Amara thought about the subfolder she had found in the archive, the property management company, the transactions she had been made to appear complicit in. She had given that to Evelyn already. Then she thought about the other things she had found in that subfolder. The things she had looked at briefly and set aside because they hadn't seemed immediately relevant to the divorce case. Documents she hadn't looked at closely because she had been focused on the asset transfers. "I need to go back into the archive tonight," she said. "Amara, I know. I'll be careful." She ended the call. She waited until after midnight. Chaehyun's light under the study door went out at 11:15. She sat in the second bedroom for another 45 minutes, listening to the penthouse settle into its nighttime silence, and then she opened the laptop. She went back to the subfolder. She opened the documents she had set aside. The first one took her 8 minutes to fully understand. When she understood it, she sat back in her chair and felt something she hadn't felt since this began. Not fear, not anger, but a specific cold dread that lived beneath both of those things, in the place where you kept your most fundamental assumptions about what a person was capable of. The document was an internal communication between Jae-hyun and a man she didn't recognize, a name she didn't know, with an address in Busan. The communication referenced a series of transactions she recognized immediately. They were her transactions. The reorganization work she had done in the second year of their marriage, the structures she had built to legitimize the syndicate's most exposed operations. She was referenced by a case number, not a name. She had been designated as a compliance liability. She read that twice. Compliance liability. She kept reading. The communication outlined a contingency structure, a legal framework that had been built around her work in such a way that if the syndicate's financial operations were ever investigated, the paper trail of decision-making led to her. Not exclusively, not as the primary actor, but as a contributing party with documented decision authority over the structures in question. The kind of documentation that would make a prosecutor look at her and see, at minimum, a person of interest, at maximum, a co-conspirator. This wasn't new. She had found the beginning of this in the property management folder. But this document was different because it contained a timeline, dates on which specific structural decisions had been attributed to her in the official records, decisions that had been made without her knowledge, using her access credentials, after she had been removed from operational involvement. He had forged her decision trail. He had been doing it for 14 months. If the criminal investigation reached the syndicate's financial operations, the documents that existed would make it appear that Amara Brooks had continued to make financial decisions for the organization for over a year after she claimed to have stepped back. It would look intentional. It would look criminal. She felt the architecture of it settle into her understanding, the full shape of what he had built, what he had been building all along, from a point so far back she couldn't see it clearly yet. The divorce was the surface. Beneath it was something more complete, a structure designed to ensure that when his empire finally fell, and he must have always known it could fall, men like him planned for collapse as a contingency, she would fall with it. He had married her. He had used her. He had built her into the load-bearing wall of a structure he intended to walk away from, and when the structure came down, she was supposed to be buried in it. She had filed for divorce thinking she was fighting back. She was fighting out of a trap that was far older and far more complete than she had understood. She pressed both hands over her face. She sat like that for a long moment in the dark of the second bedroom, in the apartment of the man who had done this, 30 feet from where he was sleeping. Then she lowered her hands. She opened a new document and began compiling every forged record, every false attribution, every document that carried her credentials on a decision she hadn't made. She worked for 2 hours. When she had everything she had found, she encrypted the file and sent it to Evelyn with a subject line that said only, "It's worse than we thought." Then she sat back and thought clearly, for the first time, about what actually needed to happen now. The civil case was not enough. Even with the freeze, even with the fraud documentation, even with everything she had spent 3 days compiling, it was not enough, because the legal structure he had built around her meant that any civil proceeding could potentially become a criminal exposure for her. Evelyn had said, something that compels a criminal referral, something that makes a prosecutor move whether they want to or not. She needed the full picture of the syndicate's criminal operations. Not the financial structures she had built, but the operations underneath them. The things she had been deliberately not shown. The things that had been happening while she was managing the surface. There was one person she knew of who had that information. One person who was not Woo-sung. She had resisted going to this person because it meant going somewhere she had sworn she would never go. Deeper into the syndicate's world instead of away from it. Trading on connections she had never wanted and had spent years telling herself she wasn't part of. But Woo-sung was dead. The forged records existed, and Jae-hyun was asleep 30 feet away, breathing slowly and evenly, utterly certain that the woman in the next room did not yet understand the full dimensions of the cage he had built around her. She closed the laptop. She looked at the wall for a long time. Then she opened the secondary phone and typed a name into the contact list, a name she had not used in over 2 years, a name she had kept because some part of her, the careful calculating part that never fully trusted the comfortable story, had known she might need it. Park Hyun-jun, former chief financial auditor for the Haneul Syndicate, the man who had existed one level above her in the organization's shadow hierarchy before his disappearance. 18 months ago, the disappearance that Jae-hyun had explained to her as a relocation for personal reasons and that she had accepted without pushing because she had still been in the stage of accepting things without pushing. She had one contact number for him. 18 months old. She typed a message. I know what he did to the records. I know about the liability framework. I need what you have. I'm ready to use it. She hit send. She sat in the dark room with the phone in her hands. The heating unit clicked on with its 4-minute sound, the sound of something being dropped, and she looked at the window and at the city beyond it and at the parking structure and at the place where the Han River would be if she could see it from this angle, running fast and dark below the bridge lights, indifferent to everything accumulating on its banks. Her phone vibrated. One word from a number that was not the one, a number she had never seen before. Tomorrow. And below it, an address. She memorized the address, deleted the exchange from both threads, and sat very still while she understood what she had just committed to. Not a legal maneuver, not a document transfer, but a meeting with a man who had survived Jae-hyun's world by knowing things Jae-hyun didn't know he knew. A man who had disappeared rather than be used. A man who had responded in under 3 minutes with a different number than the one she had reached out on, which meant he had been watching, had been waiting, and was not surprised that she had finally come. She was no longer just the woman who had filed for divorce. She was no longer just the woman who knew where the money was. She was now the woman walking deliberately back into the darkest part of the machine she had helped build, because the only way out of the trap was through the thing she'd spent 3 years telling herself she was separate from. She set the phone down. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby was still. I know, she said quietly. I know what I'm doing. She did not know if that was true, but she was going to do it anyway. She didn't sleep at all this time and didn't pretend she might. She sat on the edge of the bed in the second bedroom with her coat on and her bag packed. Not fully packed, nothing that would look like she was leaving permanently, just the essentials. Secondary phone, laptop, the encrypted drive with all the documents, her passport, enough cash for 3 days. She had packed it quietly, methodically, the way she did everything now. And then she had sat down and waited for the city outside to begin its gray winter morning and thought about Park Hyun-jun. She had met him twice in the early days of her work for the syndicate. He had been careful around her in the way. Careful men were careful around people they hadn't yet decided to trust, watching more than speaking, asking questions that sounded casual and weren't. He had disappeared 18 months ago, and Jae-hyun had explained it with a sentence and a hand gesture and moved on. And she had let him move on because she had still been in the stage of letting things go. She understood now that Park Hyun-jun had not relocated for personal reasons. He had seen something coming and had moved before it arrived. He had survived by understanding Jae-hyun's timing better than Jae-hyun thought anyone could. The address he had sent was in Seongbuk-dong, a residential neighborhood north of the city center, the kind of area where old money had built quiet houses behind high walls, and the streets were narrow and tree-lined, and a man could live without being easily found. She had memorized the address 3 times before deleting it. She could still see it exactly. At 6:15, she heard Jae-hyun's alarm through the wall. She sat very still. She heard him move through the bedroom, the bathroom, the familiar sounds of his morning routine. Running water, the particular creak of the closet door, his footsteps toward the kitchen. She heard the coffee machine. She heard his phone ring once and go to silence, which meant he'd rejected the call, which meant it was something he didn't want to discuss where she might hear. At 6:50, she heard the front door. She waited 5 minutes. Then she picked up her bag and her coat and walked to the front window and watched his car pull out of the underground garage and into the morning traffic heading south. She left 12 minutes later. The taxi took 40 minutes in morning traffic. She sat in the back and kept her eyes moving between the road ahead and the side mirror, watching for anything following. Nothing obvious. But she was aware that obvious wasn't the only category that mattered. Jae-hyun employed people whose specific skill was being unobvious. She thought about Woo-sung in the parking structure. She thought about the word cardiac. The address was a narrow house set back from the street behind a wooden gate that looked like it hadn't been painted in 10 years. She paid the driver in cash and stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the taxi left, looking at the gate, listening to the neighborhood. A dog somewhere. Traffic in the middle distance. Nothing that felt wrong. She pushed the gate open. Park Hyun-jun was waiting inside the gate, not in the house. He was standing in the small courtyard with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching her come in. He was thinner than she remembered, considerably thinner, the kind of thin that came from either illness or 18 months of living carefully, and his eyes had the specific quality of someone who had been paying attention to everything for a very long time without being allowed to relax. He looked at her stomach and looked back at her face without commenting on either. "You're late," he said. "Traffic." She looked around the courtyard. "Is this your place?" "No, come inside." The interior was sparse in the way of a space being used rather than lived in. A table, chairs, a laptop she could see through the doorway to the back room, a kettle on a small counter. He poured 2 cups of tea without asking and set them on the table and sat down and looked at her with the same watchful economy she remembered from their first meeting years ago. "The forged records," he said. "How much of it did you find?" 14 months of attributed decisions. Using my access credentials for transactions I wasn't involved in. Structural documentation that positions me as a continuing decision-maker for operations I had no knowledge of. He nodded. 17 months. You found 14. There are 3 months earlier in the sequence that he buried deeper. I can give you those. She felt something tighten in her chest. "You've had this." "I've had a great deal of things," he said, without apology and without elaboration. "Why didn't you—" She stopped herself. It was a useless question, and she knew it. He had survived by not moving until he had to. She understood that now. "What do you want in exchange?" He wrapped both hands around his teacup. "Immunity, complete and documented, signed by a prosecutor with actual authority, before I give you anything. I know what I participated in. I'm not asking to pretend I didn't. I'm asking for a formal agreement that my cooperation is recognized and protected before I walk into any room where my information becomes someone else's case. I don't have prosecutorial authority. No. But your attorney has connections to the financial crimes unit that your husband doesn't know about yet. I've been watching Evelyn Carter's career for 2 years. She has a contact at the International Financial Crimes Cooperative, a deputy director named Sung. She knows him. She hasn't used him yet because the civil case didn't require it." He looked at her steadily. "It requires it now." Amara looked at him. "You've been tracking Evelyn." "I've been tracking everyone who might eventually be useful," he said. "That's how I've stayed alive." She thought about what that meant. 18 months of living in this house or one like it, watching, maintaining contact networks, staying invisible while Jae-hyun's world continued moving without him. She thought about what kind of person could do that. Not with peace, not without cost, but functionally, practically, because the alternative was a parking structure in Yeongdeung-pyo. "Give me until this afternoon," she said. "I'll have Evelyn call Sung." He picked up his tea. "This afternoon, not tonight. Things are moving faster than you know." She set her cup down. "What do you mean?" He looked at her for a moment. "When did you last speak to your attorney?" "Last night, before I—" She stopped, something in his face. "What happened?" "Call her," he said. "Right now." She called Evelyn from the courtyard, stepping outside while Hyunjun stayed at the table. The phone rang 4 times. 5. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She stood in the courtyard with the cold Seongbuk-dong air on her face and called the secondary number Evelyn had given her for emergencies, the one that rang to Evelyn's associate, a woman named Ji-young who worked the Korean side of Evelyn's cases. Ji-young answered on the second ring. Her voice was wrong immediately. Too controlled, too careful, the voice of someone managing information. "Amara." A pause. "Where are you right now?" I'm in the north of the city." "What happened? Where is Evelyn?" Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that is itself an answer before the words come. "Evelyn didn't come in this morning," Ji-young said. "She was supposed to be at the office at 8. She's not answering her phone. We sent someone to her apartment." A breath. Her apartment was empty. There were signs that she left in a hurry. Or— Ji-young stopped. "Or she didn't leave voluntarily," Amara said. Silence. The courtyard was very quiet around her. She became aware of the sound of her own breathing, too loud, too fast, and she made herself slow it down because she needed to be able to think, and she could not think while her body was trying to panic. "Ji-young, listen to me. The documents on the secure server, are they protected?" "Yes." Evelyn compartmentalized everything. The server is, Make sure no one accesses it without my authorization. No one. Not even if someone calls claiming to be Evelyn. Do you understand? Yes. I'll be in contact within 2 hours. She ended the call and went back inside. Hyunjun was watching her face as she came through the door. He already knew from her expression what the call had been. He took her, Amar said. Yes. You knew. I suspected. I didn't know the timing. He stood up. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. Sit down, he said again, not gently. You're 8 months pregnant, and you're about to make a decision from panic that I need you to make from thinking. Sit down. She sat. She pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her and focused on the grain of the wood and made herself breathe. He's had Evelyn Carter taken, Hyunjun said, sitting across from her. This means he's escalating beyond the legal terrain. This means he's made a calculation that the legal case is no longer his primary threat, and that direct pressure on you is more efficient than continuing to fight the asset freeze through attorneys. He spoke in the flat, technical register of someone who had spent years inside this kind of logic. He will contact you, probably within the next few hours. He will offer a trade. Evelyn in exchange for your withdrawal of the case and your signature on the confidentiality agreement. He'll kill her. He'll threaten it first. Whether he follows through depends on what you do. Woo-sung was a different calculation. Woo-sung was a threat to the operational security. Carter is leverage. There's a difference in how he uses them. He paused. Probably. She heard the probably and felt it land like a stone. I need you to call Evelyn's contact, she said. The deputy director, Sung. I need you to make the call right now today, before Jae-hyun contacts me, so that by the time he does, there are people moving who aren't waiting for me to trigger the process. Hyunjun looked at her. You're asking me to move before we have a formal immunity agreement. Yes. He was quiet. Hyunjun. She held his gaze. A woman is missing. She is missing because of me. If she dies because I waited to secure your paperwork, I will not be able to recover from that, and neither will this case. She paused. You survived 18 months in hiding because you understand how to calculate risks. Calculate this one. He looked at her for a long time. His hands were still on the table. Then he picked up his phone. Jae-hyun called at 1:17 in the afternoon. She was still at the Seongbuk-dong house. She had not moved since Hyunjun had made his call. They had been working for 3 hours, Hyunjun feeding her the 3 buried months of forged records one by one, her transferring them to Ji-young's secure channel, both of them moving with the focused speed of people who understood that the window they were operating in was narrowing by the hour. When her regular phone rang and she saw his name on the screen, her hand went completely still over the keyboard. She picked it up. Amara. His voice was level. Absolutely level. Not cold, not threatening. That was the thing about Jae-hyun at his most dangerous. He never sounded dangerous. He sounded reasonable. He sounded like the man she had married, the one who'd found her at the window above the Han River. I think we need to talk. All right, she said. Not on the phone. In person. A beat. Come to the warehouse on the Incheon Road. You know the one, the storage facility near the port. Come tonight at 9. Alone. She kept her face completely still, even though no one in the room was looking at her face. Hyunjun was watching her hands. Why there? She said. Because I want a private conversation without attorneys and without interference. Because there are things I want to say to you that I should have said weeks ago. Another pause. Evelyn Carter is here with me. She's fine. I want you to know that before you make any decisions. She's fine, and she stays fine, as long as this conversation happens tonight. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. I'll be there, she said. She ended the call and set the phone on the table. You heard? She said to Hyunjun. Yes. He has her at the warehouse. He says he has her there. That doesn't mean she's still... He stopped. I know what it might mean. She said it flatly. She had to say it flatly, or she wouldn't be able to continue. I need you to call Sung again. Tell him the location. Tell him 9 o'clock. Tell him I need them in position before I arrive. If investigators go in, his people will... I know the risk. She looked at him directly. I know the risk to Evelyn. I know the risk to myself. But if I walk in there alone without anyone outside knowing where I am, there's a version of tonight where neither of us walks out, and then no one has anything. She held his gaze. Make the call. He made the call. She arrived at the Incheon Road warehouse at 8:47. She had come in a car that Hyunjun had arranged, old, unremarkable, the kind of car that appeared in 100 places in any city. She had her regular phone in her coat pocket and the secondary phone in her bag, and before she had gotten out of the car, she had sent Ji Young two things: the complete document archive and a location pin that would update every 4 minutes. The warehouse was on the edge of an industrial complex near the port, the kind of structure that had been built for practical purposes and had long since been repurposed for less practical ones. She had never been here before, but she had reviewed its ownership documentation 2 years ago. It was held by one of the syndicate's shell companies, the kind she had learned to recognize by their structural fingerprints. She had helped clean that shell company's records in the second year of her marriage. She got out of the car. The cold off the port hit her immediately. Salt and diesel and the particular industrial cold that got into the chest. She stood for a moment and looked at the building. Lights inside, visible through the gap at the bottom of the main door. Two cars parked on the far side she could see from where she stood. At least two men outside, positioned near the building's corners, not trying very hard to be invisible. She walked toward the main door. One of the men moved to intercept her. He was large and dressed in the particular way of men who wanted to be understood as dangerous without appearing to make an effort. He patted down her coat pockets, found the regular phone, held it up. "The other one," he'd said. She looked at him. "He said you'd have two," the man said. She took out the secondary phone and handed it to him. She had expected this. Ji Young had the location. The documents were already transferred. The phones were already empty of anything she needed. He gestured her toward the door. Jae-hyun was standing in the center of the warehouse space, a high-ceilinged, concrete-floored room that smelled like damp and metal, and something chemical underneath. Strip lighting overhead, several crates to one side, two of his men visible near the far wall, more she could feel at the edges she couldn't fully see. And Evelyn Carter, seated in a chair near the far wall, hands bound behind her. Her face was pale and her jacket was torn at one shoulder, and she was looking at Amara with an expression that was somewhere between relief and something Amara couldn't fully read. Something urgent, something trying to communicate a thing words weren't available for. Amara looked at Evelyn for exactly the time she needed to confirm she was alive and conscious. Then she looked at Jae-hyun. He looked tired. That was the first thing she noticed. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen on him before. Not the controlled exhaustion of a man managing a difficult situation, but something deeper, something that had been running for days. His jacket was slightly wrong on his shoulders, the way clothes went when you'd been wearing them too long and hadn't slept enough. "You came alone," he said. "You asked me to." He studied her face. This was something he had always been exceptional at, reading people, reading the gap between what they said and what they meant. She had admired it once. She now understood it as the tool it was. "You look calm," he said. "I am calm." "That worries me." "Good," she said. He moved 2 steps closer. She did not move. The distance between them was perhaps 4 meters, and she was aware of it with every nerve she had, aware also of the men at the edges of the room, aware of Evelyn's chair, aware of the door behind her that she had just walked through. "I'm going to give you something," he said. "One more time. Withdrawal of the case. Signature on the agreement. Everything that has been arranged remains in place. The money, the apartment, the security. You take the child and you live well, quietly, elsewhere. And Evelyn. Released tonight, unharmed, as long as this is resolved tonight." She looked at him. She thought about this man in Paris, in Tokyo, in New York, holding her hand across restaurant tables, saying, "You're the only person who sees what I see." She thought about the documents in the archive, the forged records, the compliance liability file, the word handled. "I found the 3 months," she said. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. "I know about the full 17 months, she said. "I know about the forged decision trail. I know what you built around my name and why." She watched him. "You weren't just trying to leave me with nothing. You were trying to leave me holding the wreckage." A beat of silence. "That's not," he started. "Don't." Her voice came out harder than she'd planned, edged with something that had been building for 5 days, and she let it come because she was past the point of managing her tone for his comfort. "Don't explain it. I've read all of it. I've had days to understand all of it. I don't need you to tell me what it was." He was quiet. "Woo-sung is dead," she said. He said nothing. "He had a daughter," she said. "Amara." His voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but shifted towards something she recognized as the register he used when he wanted to sound like he was being reasonable, like he was the adult in the room, like the situation required maturity from both of them. What happened with Woo-sung was not, "I said don't." The room was very quiet. Jae-hyun looked at her, and she could see behind the controlled surface the thing she had seen briefly in their kitchen 3 days ago, the recalibration. He was a man who solved problems by understanding the variables, and she was a variable that was not behaving as calculated, and she could see him trying to find the adjustment. "Sign the agreement," he said. "Tonight. And this ends." "It doesn't end," she said. "That's what you keep not understanding. Signing a document doesn't end what you've done. It just decides who knows about it." "Then let me be very clear about your alternative." He said it quietly. The quiet was worse than raising his voice would have been. "The case you have built depends on documents and a deceased witness and an attorney who is currently unavailable. Without Carter in operational condition, your legal position is significantly weaker than you think. The forged records you mentioned, if those become part of a criminal proceeding, they become part of it under your name as well. You have a child coming. You have no criminal attorney retained. You have no immunity agreement, no formal witness protection, and no one who can move faster than I can in this city." He paused. "I am not asking you to surrender. I am asking you to be rational." She looked at him. She thought about Hyun-jun's call to Sung. She thought about the location pin updating every 4 minutes on Ji-young's screen. She thought about the complete document archive sitting in a server that Jae-hyun's people had not reached, with Ji-young's explicit instructions not to release it to anyone without a prosecution-authorized request. She thought about what Evelyn had been trying to communicate with her eyes across the room. She looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was watching her. Her hands were bound behind the chair and her jacket was torn, and she had been held here for however many hours, and her face was pale and composed, and her eyes were absolutely clear, and what they were saying was what they had been saying since Amara walked through the door, was not "help me." It was not "be careful." It was something more specific than either of those things. It was "they don't know." "You said you want me to be rational," Amara said, turning back to Jae-hyun. She looked at him steadily. Her hands at her sides were still. She was aware of her own heartbeat, fast, but not uncontrolled, the kind of fast that sharpened things, rather than blurring them. "I am being rational. I've been rational for 5 days. I've been rational while you froze my accounts and forged my records and took my attorney, and I'm still being rational right now. Do you want to know what rational looks like from where I'm standing?" He said nothing. "It looks like this," she said. "It looks like knowing that 3 hours ago, a formal request for criminal investigation was submitted to the International Financial Crimes Cooperative with complete documentation of 17 months of forged records, 43 corporate entities, and the full capital transfer structure of the Haneul Syndicate's financial operations. It looks like knowing that the man who submitted that request is someone whose existence you are not currently aware of, because he's been invisible for 18 months and he made sure to stay that way." She held his gaze. "The documents are already in federal hands, Jae-hyun. They were in federal hands before I walked in here tonight, which means this warehouse and this conversation and whatever you decide to do next, none of it changes what has already happened." The air in the room changed. She felt it. A shift in the quality of the stillness, the specific charged silence of a room full of people who had just recalculated something. Hae-hyun's face was very controlled, but his jaw had tightened by a degree she recognized. "You're lying," he said. "I'm not." She reached into her coat pocket, the inside breast pocket the man at the door hadn't checked, and removed a single folded document. She set it on the nearest crate between them. "That's the confirmation number from the IFCC submission. Submitted at 4:18 this afternoon. You can have your attorneys verify it in the next 10 minutes if you want." She paused. "Or you can make whatever decision you were about to make and discover that the investigators who are currently positioning outside this building have it too." The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the warehouse door at the far end of the building opened. It didn't open violently. No explosion, no shout, no Hollywood entry. It opened with the specific controlled authority of people who had done this before and didn't need to perform urgency. Flashlights swept across the concrete, voices in Korean and English, firm and procedural, identifying themselves, issuing instructions to the men at the walls. Chae-hyun looked at the door. He looked at Amara. She looked back at him and did not look away. And in his face, she saw the complete and final collapse of the calculation. The moment when a man who had spent 12 years building an architecture of control understood that the architecture had given way, not in one place but in all of them simultaneously, and the woman standing 4 meters from him had known exactly when it would fall because she was the one who had mapped every load-bearing point. His men did not resist. She had expected that. Men who survive in this world survive by reading when a situation has already ended. One of the investigators reached Jae-hyun, issued instructions, reached for his arm. Jae-hyun did not move immediately. He stood still for one more second, looking at Amara, and she made herself hold that look because she owed him the truth of it. She owed them both the truth of what this moment actually was. Not triumphant, not clean, not anything like she had imagined in the worst nights of the past 5 days. It was just a man and a woman standing in a warehouse at the edge of a port city, at the end of something that had started 3 years ago at a window above a river. And between them was everything they had built and everything they had destroyed and a child who existed in the complicated wreckage of both. Then he looked away. The investigator moved him toward the door. Amara turned to Evelyn. Evelyn was already being helped out of the chair by another investigator, her bound wrists being cut free, and she was upright and steady in the particular way of someone who had decided while sitting in that chair that she was going to be steady when the moment came. She looked at Amara across the warehouse floor. "You got Hyunjun," Evelyn said. "Yes. I didn't know you knew about him." "I kept a lot of things separately," Amara said. "I learned from the best." Evelyn almost smiled. It didn't quite land. "Are you all right?" Amara looked at her, really looked at her, at the torn jacket and the pale face and the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had been taken and held and had chosen to be clear-eyed anyway. "Not yet," Amara said, "but I think I'm going to be." Outside the warehouse, she could hear the port, water against the dock pylons, the low mechanical sound of the industrial complex, the ordinary noise of a city that didn't know what had just happened inside one of its warehouses near the Incheon Road. The cold came through the open door in a wave. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby moved. She stood there in the warehouse doorway, between the cold outside and the chaos beginning to resolve itself inside, and she held her hand against her stomach and waited for her breathing to slow because the next part was going to require everything she had left, and she needed to be able to breathe when it started. The investigators kept them at the warehouse for 3 hours. It wasn't like the movies. No one moved efficiently, no one had clean answers, and the warehouse got colder as the night went on, and the port wind found every gap in the building's old walls. Amara sat on a crate near the door with a foil emergency blanket someone had given her draped over her coat, watching people in different categories of authority move in and out of the space with documents and equipment and the particular bureaucratic urgency of a system that had just received something much larger than it had expected and was trying to process it in real time. Evelyn sat beside her. Someone had brought them both coffee from somewhere. Bad coffee, gas station quality, but hot. And Evelyn held her cup with both hands and didn't say anything for a long time, and Amara didn't push her. Evelyn's wrists had marks on them. Not serious marks, not the kind that would require medical attention, but visible. Red lines from the binding. Amara had looked at them once and looked away. "How long did they have you?" Amara asked. "Since yesterday morning." Evelyn's voice was even. She had gone into the careful professional register she used when she was managing herself. "They picked me up outside my office building. 2 men. Very fast, very quiet. I was in the car before I fully understood what was happening." She paused. "I've had clients in difficult situations. I've testified in cases involving violent men. I thought I understood the theoretical risk." Another pause. "I understand it differently now." Amara looked at her. "I'm sorry." Evelyn turned to look at her directly. "Don't." Her voice had something firm in it. "Don't apologize to me. I'm a grown woman who chose this kind of work. What happened to me is not your fault." She held Amara's gaze. "And the work we did is solid. What was submitted to Sung's office this afternoon. That stands. Whatever he tries to do from wherever he is tonight, the documentation is federal now. He cannot touch it." A man in a dark coat appeared in front of them, mid-50s, the deliberate stillness of someone senior enough not to need to perform authority. He introduced himself as Deputy Investigator Han from the Financial Crimes Unit, working in coordination with the IFCC. He asked if Amara was able to answer some questions. She said yes. The questions took 90 minutes. They were careful and specific, and Han was good at his job. He didn't perform, didn't grandstand, just worked methodically through the documentation she had submitted, confirming details, clarifying sequences, building the evidentiary record with the patience of a man who understood that the record was everything and the spectacle was nothing. She answered clearly and completely. She did not soften anything. She did not editorialize. She gave him what she knew in the order she knew it, including the parts where her own decisions had been questionable, because she had decided before she walked into this warehouse that the truth was the only version of events she was capable of maintaining. At one point, Han paused and looked up from his notes. You understood the nature of the financial structures you were building. I understood portions of it from the beginning, she said. I understood more as time passed. I made a choice to continue past the point where I should have stopped. I've put that in the documentation. She held his gaze. I'm not asking for anything in exchange for this cooperation except what was discussed with the IFCC regarding my own liability exposure. If that negotiation hasn't been formalized, I need it formalized before we go further. Han nodded. It's been communicated. We'll have the formal language within 48 hours. She nodded. They continued. Jae-hyun was taken to a detention facility south of the city. She knew this because Han told her, matter-of-factly, at the end of the questioning session, the way you inform someone of the logistical outcome of an event they had been central to. He would be held pending formal charges. The charges would be significant and multiple. His attorneys, the ones who hadn't already begun distancing themselves from him in the preceding 5 days, would have access in the morning. She received this information and said thank you and watched Han walk away toward the next thing requiring his attention. Then she sat on the crate in the emptying warehouse and felt the full weight of the past 5 days arrive in her body all at once. Not dramatically, not in a collapse, but in the specific physical way exhaustion worked when you had been running on adrenaline and terror and pure focused will, and the thing you had been bracing against had finally either happened or stopped threatening to happen. Her hands started to shake. She looked at them. Evelyn put her hand over Amara's. I've got you, she said simply. Amara pressed her lips together and looked at the warehouse ceiling and breathed until her hands stopped. Park Hyunjun was not at the warehouse. He had not been asked to be, and he would not have come if asked. He was not yet at the stage of his cooperation where he appeared in places that could be photographed. He called Amara at 12:40 in the morning while she was in the back of a car Evelyn's associate Ji Young had arranged, heading back into the city. It's done, he said. It's done. A pause. She could hear him breathing, quiet and controlled, the way a man breathed who had spent 18 months being careful. The immunity agreement, he said. I need it in writing before I do anything further. Han said 48 hours. I'll make sure you're part of that paperwork. All right? Another pause. The 3 buried months, you were able to use them? Yes. They were part of the submission. He was quiet for a moment. Good. And then, unexpectedly, the child. When is it due? She looked out this car window at the city moving past in its nighttime motion. 6 weeks. You should rest, he said. It wasn't warm exactly. He wasn't a warm man, but it was genuine, which was something. I know, she said. She ended the call and looked out the window and thought about Min Woo-sung, who would never make a call like that again, and who had a daughter she didn't know the name of, and who had died in a parking structure being officially explained as cardiac. She thought about him for a long time. The formal charges against Kang Jae-hyun were filed 11 days later. Amara was not in the courtroom when they were read. She was at a clinic in Mapo with her obstetrician at a standard prenatal appointment she had rescheduled twice in the chaos of the preceding weeks. She lay on the examination table and watched the ultrasound screen and listened to her daughter's heartbeat, fast and steady and completely indifferent to anything happening in a courtroom across the city, and felt something in her chest give way that she hadn't realized she'd been holding rigid. The charges were extensive: fraud, financial concealment, criminal conspiracy, money laundering across multiple jurisdictions, coercion, and a charge related to Woo-sung's death. Not murder, not yet, because that investigation was still building, but a charge of criminal negligence in circumstances that had resulted in death, which was a beginning and meant the investigation was being taken seriously. Evelyn called her while she was still in the clinic parking lot. 43 entities frozen, Evelyn said. Her voice was different now from the warehouse, something looser in it, something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived in the same neighborhood. The Hanuel Syndicate's entire financial architecture is under federal control. His attorneys are filing motions, but the documentation we submitted is thorough enough that they're going to be fighting each individual charge for years. A pause. Hyunjun's immunity agreement was signed this morning. He's agreed to full cooperation. His testimony covers 17 years of the syndicate's operations. 17 years, Amara said. He was there from the beginning, long before you. She sat in the driver's seat of the car she had borrowed from Ji Young and looked at the clinic building. Through the glass entrance, she could see the reception desk, the soft light of the waiting room, a woman walking slowly with one hand against her lower back. The forged records, she said. My exposure. Formally addressed in the immunity negotiation. The prosecution's position is that the forged records demonstrate criminal intent on his part rather than on yours. The technical evidence of his access credentials being used after your operational removal is clean. It's in the file. A pause. Amara, you're not going to be charged with anything. That's done. She closed her eyes. She sat like that for perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds of something she didn't have a name for. Not relief, not joy, not any of the emotions she had imagined feeling at this moment during the long nights of the past 2 weeks. Something quieter than any of those things, and also more complete. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. You built the case. Evelyn's voice was dry and not unkind. I just knew where to file it. She drove back to the apartment she had been staying in since leaving the penthouse, a rental in Yongsan she had found through Ji Young, small and functional and entirely her own, with a window that faced a courtyard where an old man grew things in pots regardless of the season. She had been here 2 weeks. She had unpacked her bag on the first night and put her laptop on the desk by the window and stood in the middle of the small living room and felt the particular quality of a space that didn't contain him, that had never contained him, that had no history of him in its walls. It had felt, in that first moment, like being able to breathe for the first time in 3 years. She had stood there for a long time before she called her mother. Her mother had answered on the second ring, the way she always did, as if she had been nearby, which she probably had been. Her mother was a woman who kept her phone close in the specific way of someone who had learned that no news arriving late was ever better for the wait. Amara. Just her name. Her mother's voice. She had not meant to cry. She had been so careful not to cry for 2 weeks, had rationed it strictly, had allowed herself the 30 seconds in the parking lot, and nothing else, because she had needed to stay functional, and crying was the thing that made her least functional. But her mother's voice said her name, and she sat down on the edge of the rental apartment's second-hand sofa and cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was a child. Without strategy, without management, without any consideration of what it looked like or what it cost. Her mother talked to her through it. Didn't try to fix it, didn't offer solutions, didn't say the things people say when they want to make something stop. Just talked. About Atlanta. About the winter there. About Amara's aunt who had been asking about her. About the sweet potato pie she'd made last week. Small, ordinary things said in an ordinary voice while her daughter cried across an ocean. When Amara stopped, her mother said, Are you safe? Yes. And the baby? She's fine. She's strong. A pause. It's a girl. Her mother made a sound, something between a breath and a word. Of course it is, she said finally. Of course it is. The weeks that followed moved in a rhythm that had nothing cinematic about it. There were more interviews, more document reviews, more calls with Evelyn and with Sung's office, and with the IFCC's Korean counterpart. There were hearings she wasn't required to attend but that Evelyn briefed her on. There were motions from Jae-hyun's attorneys, which Evelyn and her team answered, and counterfilings, and the slow, grinding bureaucratic machinery of a case that was going to run for years working through its preliminary stages. There was also a leak to a financial news service. She never found out who, though she had suspicions. And once the story appeared online, it spread with the particular velocity of stories that mixed power and betrayal and money. And for approximately 10 days, she was aware of cameras outside her building and calls to her old professional contacts and a general roil of attention that she did not engage with, not because she was afraid of it, but because it had nothing to give her that she needed. She was 7 weeks from her due date, and she was tired in the physical way of late pregnancy, the exhaustion that settled into the lower back and the ankles, and the particular heaviness of carrying a weight that was entirely alive and entirely demanding. She slept more than she had slept in months. She ate consistently for the first time in longer than she wanted to count. She went to her prenatal appointments, and she walked when the weather permitted, and she cooked in the small rental kitchen in the evenings, Simple things she had always liked and had not made in years because the penthouse's kitchen had been the domain of a private chef Jae Hyun had hired in year two. She was cooking rice one evening when she thought about the kitchen in the penthouse, its clean angles and expensive surfaces, and the way she had always felt slightly like a guest in it, slightly as though she was borrowing the space. She had never mentioned that feeling to anyone. She had told herself it was adjustment, transition, the normal sensation of inhabiting someone else's aesthetic while you built something shared. She stood at the stove in the small Yongsan kitchen with its scuffed countertop and the pot of rice steaming, and she thought, I never felt like a guest here. I have never felt like a guest in a single room of this apartment. And the thing about that is it's not because the apartment is nicer or more suited to me or anything architectural. It's because every choice in it is mine. The secondhand sofa, the pot on the stove, the angle of the desk lamp, all mine. And that, she understood, had not been true of anything in her life for 3 years. She ate her dinner and watched the old man in the courtyard below, working at his pots in the cold with a headlamp strapped to his forehead, and she felt something settle in her that she recognized after a moment as the beginning of something new. Evelyn came to the apartment the following week. She came on a Thursday afternoon with 2 cups of decent coffee and a folder of documents, and they sat at the small kitchen table while Evelyn walked her through the current status of the case and Amara asked the questions that needed asking. The hearing schedule, the immunity agreement's formal status, the prosecution's timeline for the Woo-sung investigation, which had been reclassified from cardiac to suspicious in the 3rd week following the warehouse, based on a toxicology report that Amara had not been told the specifics of and had decided she didn't need to know in detail. Woo-sung's daughter, she had learned through a contact of Ji-young's, was 14. Her name was Suji. She was living with her maternal grandmother in Daejeon. Amara had thought about what to do with this information for several days. She had considered and rejected several things, and finally arrived at something simple. She had arranged, through a legal instrument that didn't require any contact or explanation, for a sum of money to be placed in an educational trust account in Suji's name, administered by a firm with no connection to either her or Jae-hyun's world. She had done it quietly, without announcing it to anyone except Evelyn, who had handled the paperwork and had not commented except to ask if the amount was what she intended. It was. It was not enough. She understood that clearly. No amount was enough for what a 14-year-old girl was carrying, and she would be carrying it for longer than any money could reach. But it was the only thing Amara could do that was concrete, that existed in the real world, that was not just intention or guilt or grief living only inside her own chest. She told Evelyn about it at the kitchen table on Thursday, because Evelyn deserved to know, and because she had almost no one else she could tell. Evelyn listened, looked at her coffee cup, looked back up. She's going to be all right, Evelyn said. Suji, she has a grandmother, a school. She's going to be all right. You don't know that. No, Evelyn said, but I choose to believe it. There are things you have to choose to believe or you can't keep doing this work. She paused. You're going to have to find your version of that, your things you choose to believe so you can keep going. Amara looked at her. What do you believe? Evelyn considered this seriously, the way she considered everything. I believe that the record matters, that what gets documented and preserved and argued through the correct process actually matters, even when it takes years and even when the outcome is imperfect. She picked up her coffee. And I believe that the women I work for, most of them, survive. Not easily, not without cost, but they survive and they build things after, and those things are real. She looked at Amara. I believe that about you. I've believed it since I read your first email. Amara said nothing for a moment. Then, I didn't know that. You didn't need to know it at the time. You needed to know it now, so. Her daughter was born on a Wednesday morning in late February, 6 days before her due date, in the maternity ward of a hospital in central Seoul. The labor was 14 hours, which the nurses told her was perfectly reasonable for a first birth, and which felt to her less like time and more like a series of distinct states of being, each one demanding complete presence, leaving no room for anything else. She was alone for most of it, not because there was no one who would have come, but because she had chosen it. She had called her mother the night before when the contractions started, and her mother had offered to get on a plane and she had said no, not yet, after, and her mother had heard something in her voice and had not pushed. She had wanted to do this part herself. She couldn't have explained fully why, except that there was something about the way the past 3 months had stripped everything to its essential reality that made her want to meet this particular reality on the same terms. When her daughter arrived, she was red and furious, and making her displeasure about the transition very clearly known. And the nurse put her on Amara's chest, and she looked down at her and felt something move through her that had no comparison in her experience. Nothing like the love she had thought she'd understood before. Nothing like anything she had a word for. More like a recognition. Like looking at something and understanding, immediately and without question, that this was the thing that had always been the actual axis. Everything else, the marriage, the empire, the documents, the warehouse, the fight that had taken everything she had, all of it had been in orbit around this. This small, furious, red-faced person had been the true center of gravity all along. She held her daughter for a long time before she let the nurses do what needed doing. She named her Maya. She had decided on the name months ago without telling anyone, and had held it carefully in the private part of herself that Jae-hyun had never reached. Her mother arrived 4 days later, flew 14 hours from Atlanta, and came directly from the airport to the hospital, and walked into the room and looked at Maya in the clear bassinet by the bed, and went very still for a moment. Then she looked at Amara. "She looks like you," her mother said. "She looks like herself," Amara said. Her mother sat in the chair beside the bed and held Maya, and didn't say anything for a long time, and Amara watched her and felt the specific relief of being known by someone who had known her before she became any of the things she'd become. Her mother stayed for 3 weeks. She slept on the second-hand sofa in the Yongsan apartment, and she cooked and she held Maya in the evenings, and she did not ask Amara to explain herself, which was the specific grace of a woman who understood that some things required living through rather than narrating. One evening, 10 days after Maya was born, they were sitting in the small living room, her mother on the sofa with Maya, Amara in the chair by the window, the city going dark outside. And her mother said, without preamble, "Are you angry at yourself?" Amara thought about this. It was the kind of question her mother asked, simple, exact, requiring an honest answer. "Sometimes," she said, "for the things I told myself were fine when they weren't fine, for the times I noticed something and chose the comfortable version." She paused. "I was good at choosing the comfortable version." Her mother looked at Maya. "Most people are." "That's not the same as it being all right." "No," her mother agreed. "It's not. But it's the same as being human." She looked up. "You stopped choosing the comfortable version. When it mattered, you stopped." Amara looked out the window. The old man in the courtyard was not there. Too cold, too late. But his pots were still arranged along the low wall, patient and particular. "I had help," she said. "Evelyn, Hyunjin, even Woo-sung, who didn't survive helping me." "Yes," her mother said. "You needed help and you found it and you used it. That's also human. The people who refuse help because they think needing it makes them weak. Those are the people who don't make it." She paused. "You made it, Amara." Maya made a small sound. Her mother shifted her slightly, automatically, the body knowledge of someone who had done this before. Amara watched them both and did not say anything. The preliminary hearing for the case against Kang Jae-hyun took place 4 months after the warehouse. Amara did not attend. She had discussed it with Evelyn and decided that her presence served no purpose at the preliminary stage, and that she had better uses for the day than sitting in a courtroom building surrounded by cameras she'd been told to expect. She was at the office she had rented by then. One room on the 4th floor of a building in Mapo, which she had chosen because it was nowhere near the Gangnam corporate district, and nowhere near the penthouse, and nowhere near anything that reminded her of the past 3 years. The room had 2 windows and enough space for 3 desks, and a whiteboard she had filled and erased and refilled several times already. She had been working for 2 months on the structure of what she was going to build next. She had come to it without planning to, or rather, she had come to it through the specific logic of her own experience, which was that she knew better than almost anyone how financial manipulation inside a relationship worked, how hidden structures concealed theft, how a person could build something alongside someone who was systematically dismantling their legal standing while performing love. She knew it because she had lived it, and before she had lived it, she had built the instruments of it with her own hands, and both of those things gave her a kind of knowledge that was not available in any textbook or professional training. The organization she was building would do 2 things. It would provide pro bono financial forensic analysis for individuals, primarily women, though not exclusively, who were in the process of leaving controlling or abusive financial situations and needed someone who could map what had been done to their money, their assets, their professional records. And it would provide referrals to legal and psychological support, working in a coordinated model with attorneys like Evelyn, who understood that financial abuse and legal manipulation were not separate from physical or psychological abuse, but deeply interwoven with them. She had drafted the framework in the evenings after Maya was asleep. She had consulted Evelyn, who had immediately offered to be an advisory board member. She had reached out to 3 other people whose work intersected with what she was building, and all 3 had said yes without requiring significant persuasion. She sat at her desk on the day of Jae-hyun's preliminary hearing with Maya. In a bassinet, she had moved to the office because Maya was still too young for the childcare arrangement she was working toward. And she worked through the morning on the organization's structural documents, with Maya's small, irregular breathing as background, and she did not think about the courtroom, or not more than briefly, when her phone showed a message from Evelyn at 11:17 that said simply, "Charges confirmed. All of them. Next hearing in 2 months." She read it, set her phone down, and went back to work. Ji-young took her to the office for the first time that afternoon. Not her office, the new one, but the old one. Jae-hyun's administrative building in Gangnam, the one where she had worked during the years when she was still telling herself she was just helping her husband build something. Ji-young had an errand there, something administrative connected to the financial freeze, and Amara had said she would come along. She hadn't examined why too closely. She sat in the car outside the building while Ji-young went in, and she looked at the building and felt very little, which surprised her. She had expected something, anger, or grief, or the particular vertigo of confronting a place that had been central to a life you no longer lived. She felt none of those things. She felt like a woman sitting outside a building that had once been relevant to her. That was all. She looked at it for a while. Then she looked at Maya sleeping in the car seat, impossibly small, cheeks slightly flushed from the car's warmth, hands curled in the specific way of a sleeping infant, as if holding something even in sleep, as if even unconscious the body was ready to hold on. She thought about Jae-hyun saying the night she had overheard him, "She's already served her purpose." She thought about all the things she had built in the 3 years of their marriage, the structures, the systems, the financial architecture, the empire that now belonged to federal investigators and seizure orders. She had spent a significant portion of the past several months reckoning with what her own culpability in that building had meant, not as a legal question. The legal question was handled, but as a personal one. She had known more than she had admitted to herself. She had made choices. She had dressed in the language of trust and love when some portion of them had simply been the choice to not look too directly at what she was participating in. She did not absolve herself of that. She had decided not to, because absolution required a kind of narrative convenience that she was no longer interested in applying to her own story. What she had also done, though, and this had taken longer to understand, was build something real. The financial architecture was criminal at its core, yes, but the skills she had used to build it were not criminal. The intelligence, the precision, the ability to see how systems interlocked and where they were vulnerable, those were hers. She had not become competent in service of Jae-hyun. She had brought the competence with her. He had used it. He had tried to turn it against her. He had failed because the same competence that built his empire had been able to map its destruction. You couldn't take the knowledge out of a person by taking everything else. Ji-young came back to the car. She looked at Amara with a slightly questioning expression, the way she had learned to look at Amara in the past several months, checking, not intruding. "Ready?" Ji-young said. "Yes," Amara said. She did not look back at the building as they drove away. Evelyn came to the Yongsan apartment for dinner 6 months after the warehouse. Maya was 3.5 months old and had recently discovered that the sound of her own voice was interesting, which meant dinner had a running commentary of experimental sounds that neither of them tried to talk over. They ate the food Amara had cooked, nothing elaborate, rice and a stew, and the kimchi the woman downstairs had given her, because the woman downstairs had decided, based on some private calculation, that Amara needed feeding. And they talked about the case and the organization and the spring, which was beginning to appear in the courtyard below in the particular tentative way of Seoul springs, never quite certain of themselves until suddenly they were. At some point, Evelyn said, "Have you thought about what you'll tell her? Eventually, about all of this?" Amara looked at Maya, who was on her playmat making her sounds. "I've thought about it." "And?" "The truth," she said. "The honest version. Not the heroic version, not the victim version. The version where I made real choices that had real consequences, some of which I'm proud of and some of which I'm not, and the sum of all those choices is her." She paused. "I think she deserves the honest version." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "That's a harder story to tell than either of the other ones." "Yes," Amara said, but it's the only one she'll actually be able to use. Evelyn looked at Maya and then back at her coffee cup and smiled. Not the professional smile, the other one, the one Amara had only seen a few times and thought was probably the more accurate of the two. "She's going to be remarkable," Evelyn said. "She already is," Amara said. "I'm just trying to deserve her." The trial, when it came, lasted 11 weeks. Amara testified on the 8th day. She had prepared with Evelyn for 3 weeks. She had sat across the table in Evelyn's office and answered every version of every question the opposing attorneys might ask, and Evelyn had pushed her hard, not cruelly, but with the specific pressure of someone who understood that the opposing side would push harder, and that the only way to survive it without breaking was to have already been through it. On the day she testified, she wore a dark blue suit she had bought for the occasion. She had spent more time than she expected choosing it, not because she wanted to perform anything, but because she understood that how a person appeared on the witness stand communicated something before they spoke, and she wanted what she communicated to be, "I am serious, and I am not afraid, and I have nothing to hide." She told the truth for 4 hours and 20 minutes. She answered every question directly. When the opposing attorney pushed on the areas of her own involvement, she answered those directly too. She had made choices. She named them. She did not excuse them. She described what she had built and why, and what she had understood and when. She described what she had discovered. She described the documents, the forged records, the transfer schedules, the warehouse, all of it, in the precise and technical language of someone who had built the thing she was describing and could speak about its components with authority that no amount of cross-examination was going to undermine. She did not look at Jae-hyun while she testified. She had decided this in advance. Not out of fear and not out of anger. She had worked through both of those in the months of preparation, and what remained was something more flat and conclusive. She didn't look at him because there was nothing in looking at him that the record needed. The record needed what she knew, which she was providing. Her eye contact with the man who had tried to erase her was not part of what the record needed. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past the defense table where he was seated. She did not plan what happened next. It was not something she had considered or rehearsed. But as she passed, she glanced at him. Just once. A full second of actual looking, the way she had looked at him in the warehouse and in the kitchen and at the window above the Han River 3 years ago, when she had still been the woman who let herself believe the more comfortable story. He was looking back. His face was controlled, the way it always was. He had not lost that, whatever else 11 weeks of trial and 6 months of detention had cost him. But underneath the control was something she had not expected, something that looked, without much performance around it, like he was finally understanding something he had spent 3 years being certain he understood and had been wrong about. She didn't stop. She didn't slow. She walked past and through the courtroom door and into the corridor beyond, where Evelyn was waiting, and she kept walking. But the verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in October. She was at the office in Mapo when Evelyn called. Maya was in childcare down the street, the arrangement Amara had finally settled into. The woman who ran it, a no-nonsense person named Mrs. Cho, who had assessed Maya on the first day with the specific eye of someone who had seen a great many babies and informed Amara that Maya was clearly intelligent and would likely cause problems in the best way. Amara was at her desk reviewing a case file for the organization's third client, a woman in Busan whose husband had restructured their joint business assets across 18 months into accounts she couldn't access. A pattern Amara now recognized with the efficiency of someone who had mapped it from the inside. When her phone rang, she looked at Evelyn's name on the screen. She picked it up. "Guilty," Evelyn said. "All primary charges. The fraud, the concealment, the criminal conspiracy, the coercion charge." A pause. "The charge related to Woo-sung. Guilty." Amara sat at her desk and held the phone and looked at the whiteboard across the room, which had the Busan case notes on it in her handwriting. Names, account numbers, structural connections, the same geometry she had once used for a different purpose. "Sentencing is in 6 weeks, Evelyn said. "Given the scope and the duration, the prosecution is confident. We're looking at a significant term." "How significant?" Evelyn told her. She sat with it. "Okay," she said. "Amara, I heard you. She stopped, pressed one hand against the desk. "I need a minute." "Take the minute," Evelyn said, and waited. She took the minute. She sat in her office in Mapo with the Busan case notes on the whiteboard and Maya's drawings. Her daughter had recently discovered crayons, which Mrs. Cho deployed as stimulation, And the results were abstract but passionate, taped to the bottom corner of the board, and she let herself feel what this moment was. Not relief, not triumph, nothing that clean, something more like the sound that a body makes when a weight it has been carrying for a very long time is finally, actually, set down. Not joy in any recognizable sense, more like the beginning of what might, eventually, be peace. "Thank you," she said finally, "for all of it." Evelyn's voice, when she responded, was quieter than her professional register and more honest than anything Amara had heard in their months of working together. "You did the work," she said. "I keep telling you that." "I know," Amara said. "But you stayed in it, even after the warehouse. You stayed." A pause. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I did." She picked Maya up from Mrs. Cho's at 4:30. Maya was awake and alert, sitting in Mrs. Cho's arms with the expression of someone who had been forming opinions all day and was ready to report on them. She reached for Amara immediately, both arms, the whole body leaning, and Amara took her and held her and buried her face briefly in the warm curve of Maya's neck and breathed. "Good day?" she said to Mrs. Cho. "She ate everything," Mrs. Cho said. "I've never seen a baby eat so purposefully." Amara pulled back and looked at her daughter's face. Maya looked back with the specific, focused attention she brought to everything. Assessing, taking in, already processing at some level Amara couldn't access yet and might never fully understand, her own person, from the very beginning, utterly and completely her own person. "Let's go home," Amara said to her. Maya grabbed her collar with one fist and said something emphatic in a language that wasn't language yet, but clearly carried the full weight of her meaning. They walked home through the October afternoon, Amara carrying Maya against her chest, the city moving around them in its particular late afternoon rhythm. People leaving offices, kids coming out of schools. The particular shift of the light that happened in Seoul in October, when the angle changed and everything went briefly gold before the evening came in cold. She walked without hurrying. She didn't need to hurry. The office would be there tomorrow. The Busan case would be there tomorrow. The long work of building something out of what she knew would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and for as far forward as she could think. She stopped at the entrance to her street, looked at the courtyard building. The old man was there today, despite the cold, working at his pots with his patient seasonal certainty, doing what he did regardless of what the weather was doing because the plants needed what they needed, and that was simply the fact of it. She watched him for a moment. Then she carried her daughter through the gate and up the stairs and into the apartment that was entirely, in every corner and surface and angle of light, hers. She put Maya on the playmat, put the kettle on, stood at the window and looked at the courtyard and the city beyond it, and the sky going dark above the buildings in the particular Seoul October way, purple and then gray. And then the first scattered lights coming on across the skyline. She thought about the window above the Han River 3 years ago. The party, the river, the man who had found her calculating the room. She thought about what she had brought to that moment, all of it, the intelligence and the loneliness and the specific hunger to be truly seen by someone, and the way that hunger had made her willing to look past things she shouldn't have looked past. She thought about what she was bringing to this moment. All the same things, most of them, because people did not become different people through suffering. They became more themselves, whatever that meant in their particular case. She was still the woman who calculated rooms. She was still the woman who could read the architecture of systems, who noticed gaps and load-bearing points, who could not leave an unread thing alone. She was also the woman who had walked into a warehouse at night with an encrypted drive and a plan and a secret she hadn't disclosed to the man who thought he had won and had watched his world end while hers, damaged and costly and not remotely, what she had planned, kept going. Maya made a sound from the playmat. Amara looked at her. Her daughter was on her back, looking at the ceiling, hands reaching for something not there, practicing, testing, doing the work of being alive with the full seriousness it deserved. The kettle began to sound. Amara turned from the window. She went to make the tea.